Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back, everybody, for another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. This is actually a special episode in two ways. We've got a special guest that we'll get to in just a minute here, but it's also our 250th episode. So, Ben, a little bit of a mini celebration there, right?
Nice,
we got the 100,
milestone.
the 200, now the 250. So,
quarter century mark.
Yeah, there you go. Make sure to share us with all your colleagues. I know this is usually a great training resource for folks out here in the freight broker space that don't always have the best internal education at a smaller office. Leave us a comment, subscribe, all that good stuff that helps us get in front of more people. And, if you want to get some more content, just go to freight360.net. You got a full searchable library of all of our blogs, our YouTube videos, whether they're full-length podcasts or shorter educational videos, demos of some of the products that are in the space. And you can also find the Freight Broker Basics course if you're looking for an educational option there for a deep dive into how to launch a brokerage and grow the sales side of it, the carrier networking, and all of that good stuff. So before we get into our news and sports, I wanted to give a brief introduction to our guest today, Erika Voss with DAT. She's with us, and we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. So real quick, Erika, before we get into the weeds in a bit here, give for anyone who doesn't know you, and they probably don't because you're fairly newer to DAT, tell us a little bit about you, what you do with DAT, and then we'll peel back the layers throughout the episode.
All right. Sounds good, Nate. Hey, thanks, everyone. Good morning. My name is Erika Voss. I'm the Vice President Information Security Officer here for DAT.
Awesome. Well, there's a lot to unpack, and we're going to definitely get there. You got a really interesting background. I'm sure a lot of stories we'll get to. So, but thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. Ben, what's going on in South Florida?
Weather's not as hot as it probably is up there. I mean, for the most part. So yeah, not too many complaints for this time of year.
We finally cooled down. It was like here in Buffalo, it was like in the 90s for a little bit of a stretch there the last week. I think the whole like Northeast, right? Like a lot of record temps were set, but it has finally cooled off. I shouldn't say cooled off. It's 75 right now, which I'll take. This is like perfect for June in Western New York. But
I would say this. I was telling you, I played golf Friday. It's probably like the first time I played, I think, since like January. So like still summer heat, like high 90s in the middle of the day. We'd heat off at like 9. And I'm like, I used to play a lot, but I used to be used to it, right? And I'm like, this won't be that big of a deal. We got done. Like we played pretty quick, but like 1:32, I got back. Like I had like a headache for like an hour and a half by the time I got home and like literally cooled down. I'm like, I really think I like almost had heat stroke and just like wasn't paying attention. I'm like, it's a lot hotter out there when you're sitting out there for 4 or 5 hours out in the sun.
It is one of those things too, where like with golf, if you don't golf, like you wouldn't think about this necessarily, but like if you golf, you get it. Like you are committed for 4 to 5 hours and you've got to plan ahead. So like whether it's what you're wearing or like hydrating, or for me, a lot of times it's like bug spray or even like an allergy pill, because we'll have like the cotton blowing around and
ibuprofen in every one of my golf bags.
Yep,
water bottles, and all my golf clothes are white for that very reason, because any other color is just ridiculous to wear.
And if you suck at golf like me on some days, just make sure you have enough balls with you, because I tend to like throw in the woods and donate them to Mother Nature.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of golf, I'm going to segue into sports. My cousin, Darren Kowalski, won the Pittsburgh Open by 4 shots at the Pittsburgh Field Club. And he was in the Post-Gazette this morning for becoming the first player to win both the Tri-State Amateur and the Pittsburgh Open in the same year. He was 4 under, 136 for 2 rounds. He was the overall and low amateur. So he technically won the whole tournament, but since he was an amateur, the low pro got the check, but he won by 2 strokes.
So in the amateur, I'm actually curious, do they only play 2 days or 2 rounds? Is that what it is versus 4?
I think it's most of those tournaments are 2 or 3 days. I mean, I've followed him for years, and I really think almost every tournament is kind of 2 days until you get into like the PGA. Maybe the Korn Ferry Tour is like 4 days like the PGA, but I don't really know off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure most of them are 2 days. Mostly because guys got to take off work to go play, and I'm guessing 4 days is a lot to get that many people to be able to.
Yeah. That makes sense because they all have other jobs, or a regular career, most likely.
Yep.
I didn't watch the PJ event this past weekend, but I heard that there was like people stormed the green on like a playoff hole. Did you hear about that?
I didn't get a chance to watch any.
It was something about it was like climate activists were like, I forget what their message was, but either way, they like stormed the green on like, I think it was a playoff hole with Scotty Scheffler or something like that on Sunday, but they were able to resume play. So
I will be looking into that after the show.
Crazy. Also, celebration in South Florida, the Florida Panthers. I never would have thought it went to Game 7 for the Stanley Cup, but because I think we talked about it last week, we're like, yeah, Stanley Cup's probably going to be over by the time this episode drops because Florida was up 3-0, and Edmonton came back and won 3 straight to tie it up. But that was a good Stanley Cup to watch. I don't watch a ton of hockey like I used to when the Sabres were good, but I just like sports, and that was a good, entertaining Game 7.
Justin was at Game 5 down here, and he went to Game 7 2 days ago. He was telling me about it Friday. He was like, it was the most fun and disappointing, when they lost Game 5 to not close it out. Yep. But he was like, yeah, I think I'm going to try to get tickets to Game 7. Hopefully it goes to Game 7. So it was pretty cool that he got to get back there and watch them close it out.
And it wasn't like it was a blowout. Like it was I think it was 2-1 was the final score. So good stuff. I don't have anything else in sports.
Couple things in news. This is mostly, saw this in Freight Caviar too this morning. Morgan Stanley put out a 6-month forecast for spot rates. And this is good news to everybody in the market because they are extremely optimistic. I will cite just the highlights, but current average spot rate right now across the country, $1.60 per mile. The 6-month forecast, $1.91 per mile. 12-month forecast, $2.16 a mile.
And keep in mind, that's without fuel. That's just your line haul spot rates.
So optimistic outlook, $2.39 on 6 months. Pessimistic, worst case scenario, they're thinking $1.52, which is about 8 cents less than we're at now. But optimistically, 12 months from now is $2.85 a mile, right? Without fuel. Like that is significant. That is like literally, I don't know, I can't do that percentage that quick in my head, but it looks like it's about 60% increase over $1.60 like that. Oh, it's fantastic. So, in the bigger picture, forecasts suggest there's going to be a reversal of recent downward trends, most of which they're attributing to economic recovery expectations and capacity exiting after prolonged rate pressure. So more carriers leaving the market throughout the rest of the year and more shipping demand, more freight, more shipments. So hey, a little spot of sunshine in the outlook. We'll see how things play out.
I saw one, and I included it in our newsletter that went out this week from Transport Topics. So, like, if you're a TIA member, Transport Topics, you usually get it either sent to your office or you get the digital one in your inbox. I think the article was actually from like a week or so ago, but it was about the appropriations from DC that are specifically being, I think it was $2 million being appropriated to create a task force to combat fraud in the supply chain. So cargo theft, double brokerage, all the illegal brokerage activities, things like that. So like they say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We've been going to DC every year for, the TIA has been going for a while, but the last 2 years, and this will be, I think, the third year now where that's like the big talking item is fraud. And we're going to definitely talk a little bit about fraud today, but it's a good sign.
One other RXO shares up on news. They're going to buy Coyote. If they do buy Coyote, they will become the third largest 3PL in the country. So pretty big deal. Stock
they're
market.
Buying them off of UPS. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was the big acquisition like 7 or 8 years ago. I remember.
Yeah. And here's the thing, right? Like, that one failed miserably related to integration. Like they just weren't able to get any of the economies of scale by bringing them back. They lost a ton of money on it.
$775 million, according to Steven.
Apparently they lost on the deal between buying it and having to resell it. So like, I don't think this is I don't know. I don't think this positive outcome is assured or as likely as maybe everyone hopes. I think there's a lot that they're going to have to do to integrate these two companies to get that value. And I think we're going to see whether or not that, well, like always, see whether or not that plays out over the next couple of years.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So Steven said they bought it for. So UPS bought Coyote for $1.8 billion, and I guess it was 3 years ago, 2021, and then sold it for just under $1.1 billion. Is what they announced this week. So not a great negative spread there for the shareholders.
Buying high and selling low, kind of the opposite, but
exactly. But well, cool. Let's get into the episode here. So, unless Erika, are you a sports fan? You got any sports input or anything?
Huge sports fan. I mean, let's be real. Let's talk about Seattle. I mean, born and raised here with the Seattle Seahawks. Love them. Diehard fan. It'll be interesting to see. We got a new young coach. Got some new young players. Let's see what we can do. I mean, we talk every year about being a rebuilding team. I hope we actually, could do something with it. And let's see where we go. And then, I mean, you guys talk weather. I mean, Seattle, nothing but 50 shades of gray here. Get your Patagonia. Don't bring an umbrella. That's how we're going to know you're a tourist. Like, get out there. Enjoy it.
That's funny. Yeah. So, I mean, Seattle, you guys won a Super Bowl, was it 10 years ago? Right?
10 years ago, yep.
I'm a diehard Bills fan here in Buffalo, and that's like,
Josh Allen spotted at a wedding.
Maybe someday.
That's your highlighted news now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited. This is like the time of year when like I'm itching for like all the open practices to start and preseason and all that. It feels like it's just around the corner. So
the countdown begins when it's like, July 1 starts next week, and it's like, all right, like let's get into preseason. I'm ready for the games. I want to see who's going to be the team this year.
Yep.
Are the Chiefs going to actually go do a three-peat like they say they're going to? I mean, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a good football season.
We shall see. We shall see. Well, cool. Let's get into our discussion, Erika, today with you and cybersecurity, and we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. So you mentioned your role with DAT, been there for 6 months. Tell us a little bit about what your journey was like, because I know you didn't start in logistics or freight, but how did you get to where you are today? What's your background look like that kind of sets you up to do what you're doing today?
Yeah. I mean, my background has been pretty wild, I think, more than non-traditional, I guess you could say, security person. So I started in physical security. I worked for Department of Corrections. I was a corrections officer, promoted through the ranks, got into emergency management, got into business continuity, disaster recovery. And then my career kind of took off after that because it was more around the companies that I had worked for who had supply chain footprints. It was, how do you protect the product? How do you protect the truck? Like, what's the seal? Why did we not want someone to take the seal off? And I remember going, what is all this? Like, I was more about people and process.
Yeah.
And so for me, like through the years, it just kind of evolved into, just the different companies and looking at e-commerce and the types of supply chain attacks that started happening. And then why it became like a hot thing to, steal a truckload and what that meant. And then fast forward to where it is today with DAT. I mean, double brokering is a great example. I remember Googling double brokering and I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And so I did and read it and I was like, oh my God, this is like an actual thing. And then it was very like eye-opening to me. It wasn't about the type of risk or threats or attacks that I'm used to. It was more around, hey, how do I actually go do this? And how do I actually go protect this and solve for this? And so that became very different for me. And it was a little mind-blowing, I think, more than anything. And what I loved about it though is, I've been in some element of security that ranged from supply chain to products to trucks to, physical security to cybersecurity. So it's just, my career has been incredible and it's been really fantastic, but it's also like, this is a different type of attack landscape that I've ever had to experience. So it's more around, now how do I go actually not only protect the business, but also like protect our customers, which is different.
Yeah, it's wild. So it's funny, like we'll talk about it throughout our show, is like kind of the joke of people that don't work in the freight brokering world. It's like hard to explain exactly what we do and how it all works. And then if you want to add a layer to that, you try to talk about the fraud that we deal with, and it's like, wait, what? Like what is double brokering? How does this work? But if you put like a number on what the fraud is evaluated, I think the most recent we've found, Ben, is like $800 million a year or something like that, right? Between like double brokerage, cargo theft, something. Wasn't it like 800 million?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard estimates all over the place. I would love to hear from Erika what are you looking at, or what do you use as that number, if
Yeah.
you have one in your head, for the context of how significant this is across the entire United States?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. So, like, I'm a huge person who always looks at the data statistics. 800 million. I've seen that number pretty commonly actually now for the last few months. And like, you could pull it from, whether you pull it from FBI statistics, kind of because they're actually attacking and tracking the fraud. But if you look at like supply chain attacks, which is kind of a bigger number really to go after, I mean, you're looking at over $1 billion of just supply chain fraud, whether it's been cargo, whether it's been freight, whether it's, ships, containers. I mean, it's massive. And so I think you have to really understand your footprint. So like for me, like it's very much about the trucks. It's very much about trucking versus I also, previously once upon a time looked at supply chain attacks. I had to think about containers. I had to think about cargo. I had to think about, stuff going overseas and, CT-PAT and like, how do I look at TAPA and like some of these industry standards where I was like, oh my God, this is a whole new world. But 800 million is pretty common. That's a pretty easy number, but your statistics are really going to depend on where you want to pull you from when you're looking at what your company is actually trying to solve for. So
That's the thing that I've always found interesting, right? Because I was always curious, and we've never been able to like dig in. We've talked to some folks at Verisk to drill down a little bit behind the scenes, and had some people from law enforcement they work with that have given us some of this information. And what the thing is, like, you hear that, and to me, like, it just seems low, but it's like anecdotal. Because I'm like, I talk to people every week that are running into instances, and I know they're not reported. They don't know who to report them to. They're just paying cash to make them go away to keep the customer happy and move on. And I'm like, out of 10 that I hear about every few months, right? 8 aren't reported, that someone just pays out of pocket, moves on, tries to resolve it, deals with the claim. And I'm like, I know they're not getting reported. So like, I'm always curious how much of that 800 million estimate is reported and how much of it is, just them having to inflate the numbers for what isn't reported, because it's
right.
enormous. Like the one small ring, like one of the clients that Nate and I know, they came across one. This is like 3 weeks ago. We talked to the guy at Travelers Insurance that was working on it, because they had like 2 loads stolen that they were able to recover, right? But that insurance agent said that particular ring over a 10-day period was able to get away with something between 7 and 10 million bucks in a week. And I'm like, that is a small company,
A lot
right?
of
A small
zeros.
instance in a week hitting 10 million. This has to be happening at least weekly somewhere in the country. I'm like, 10 million times 50, right? You're at 500
Yeah.
million. That's
Do the
just
math.
small instances. I'm
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
and Ben, to add to your point, it's not all being reported, because I remember the most recent policy forum in DC that TIA hosted. They had 80,000 reports of fraudulent brokerage submitted through like the FMCSA's reporting, whatever whatever their reporting system is. And one of the points I made, I was like, yeah, like my brokerage had been double brokered in the last 2 years as of like today, right? Last year, we've probably been double brokered like 40 or 50 times. And like, we've never reported it. Like, we'll talk about it and we do stuff to like stop, but we don't have the time to go through and file a report every single time it happens. We're more worried about like, how do we try and recover some kind of money, or, blacklist this fraudulent carrier, or this spoofed email address that stole someone's identity. Like, it's definitely not being reported. So I bet the number is way higher. But either way, like 800 million is a lot of
it's
money. It's a
significant.
huge problem. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, like on a like big picture, 40,000 foot view, Erika, for you, what, like, so you obviously 6 months you've been there. What does your department look like? Like, what does it consist of as far as, hey, here's what our job or entails, or our mission statement, or what is the role of I guess, give me the department title again. You said information cyber something. It sounded cool.
No, yeah. So Chief Information Security Officer. So that's
Okay.
that's the title essentially. The thing that is really great is, I started with DAT. My team has tripled in size already since I've been here in 6 months. So the sheer numbers of that has grown significantly, which is also kind of unheard of in a cyber position. Like, you kind of wait and see what you got going on, but it's really about looking at your attack landscape, which is kind of the cool thing that really kind of gets you involved. The fun part though for me, honestly, has really been around how do we deliver the future. And so my big thing is really around what what does that space need to look like? And that space is really around, how do you secure things? How do you protect? How do you architect? So how are we building things better? How are we thinking about making sure we're being compliant for our customer? And then also it includes everyone. So delivering the future is what I'm all about. And so I think what's great for me is, like, when I think about what I want to do at DAT, I mean, I'm very much a change agent. I can come and sit down and I'm going to draw a truck on the, whiteboard for you. And I'm going to say there's 18 different types of attacks I could do with a truck. And people just look at that and they go, what? And I'm like, let's talk about it. Let's think about, the brakes. Let's think about, the reefer systems, or the cargo monitoring, or the device systems, or the 8 USB drives. Like, all the things that actually run a truck are very automated now. It's an attack. That's an attack landscape for me. And then on top of that, now put the person in the seat. So the person in the seat is also carrying a smartphone. And then you have to think about, what are they clicking on? What are they calling? I mean, your attack landscape is very different. And I think that's where I think people need to stop and kind of look and go, oh my God, not only am I driving, millions of product down the road, or millions of dollars in my cargo that I'm carrying potentially, or hundreds of thousands of dollars, it still has 18 different type of attacks that I can go after. And that's not including the driver.
That's crazy.
It reminds me of that book that came out. This is probably like 15 years ago now. I think it was called Against All Enemies. It was one of the people from, I think it was the Bush cabinet or something in the early 2000s, wrote this book about exactly that, the landscape and the change in the late 2000s, and how just like the surface area of which you're exposed to be able to, have to defend now, right, is just growing every single day. Every single tool you add, every product you use, your emails, who's reaching you, right? It's like, it's not infinite, but it is infinitely larger than it was prior, right? In a traditional business of, you got a fax machine, a phone number, and an email address, right? Exactly. There's just so many more opportunities to be vulnerable these days. Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane, so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes.
In freight, time is money, and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started. And I think about like the customer count at DAT, right? If you think about the amount of like tens of thousands of brokerages, and then 100,000 plus trucking companies are using the product, right? So you've got a 6-figure customer count that all are, a lot of them use your products and your services in some sort of similar way, but a lot of them are different. Like if you go to the trucking company, the truck driver, right? Like you mentioned, some of them are reefer fleets, some of them are not, some of them drive in one area, some of them don't, some of them use ELD, some of them are exempt. And it's just, you gotta, I feel like you have to have a very, very broad mindset as to like, this is a very, very large scale of what our, like you called it, like the target, right? There, it's not just, hey, this is the one vulnerable area. It's like, no, there's a ton of them. So I'm curious, and obviously there's probably things you can and cannot share, but can you talk through a little bit about some of the threats that you guys are seeing that are like these are like the biggest issues that we're dealing with right now, or even broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, when I think about what I go into, like every day I log in, and I look at, let's say a threat intelligence platform, which I think is key for anybody to have this day and age if you're going to do anything cyber related. I go in and I look, and it's
really quick. What does that mean? Break that down for us, Barney style, because that's something I have not heard of before.
Okay, so if you think about you go to like DAT's load board. That's where you get your information, correct, of like the loads you want to pick up. That's the same thing for me from a cyber perspective. I log into like a load board style, but it's all threat intelligence. It's, intelligence feeds that are coming in like literally throughout the globe that are telling me there's a supply chain attack happening, or there's a domain being stood up that's a phishing domain. There's an insider threat attack. There's a ransomware attack. It tells me all the different types of attacks that are happening, and it tells me some in real time. It tells me where there's bad countries, where there's bad actors. It tells me about different groups that are out there. If you think about, what's in the news today, everybody's talking about CDK and their, data breach that they'd have, which is for all the cars. Same thing.
Yep.
I get all that intel, but I get it in one really cool view that kind of tells me, okay, how do I set up DAT to not be attacked all the time? Or how do I set up the right, attack surface to make sure we're not being hit? That's what every cyber person is going to do. They're going to look and go, okay, how do I make sure I can protect, what we say is the front doors, the walls, the roof, that's how we think about it. So I kind of put that same terminology in place is how do I protect the truck? So I look and go, I log into my threat intelligence platform and I start reading and like paying attention to what's going on. And then I start looking at my attack landscape and go, okay, where can I change things? How can I get us to be faster at detections? How can I get us to be smarter with the alerts that we're doing? And where can we take action in real time? And so for me, I mean, it's not even just DAT. It's an industry problem. It's everybody's dealing with fraud. Everybody's dealing with, impersonation. Everybody's dealing with, phishing campaigns, or they're dealing with phishing attacks, or, clicking on a link, which, I'll be very candid. I like die laughing when people talk to me about, oh gosh, I'm being phished. And I'm like, it's 2024. Why are you still clicking on links? Like we've done
that email does not look real. Yes.
Yeah. Like we've done a shitty job as an industry because people are still clicking on links. They're now, and people get frustrated and like, mad. And it's like, oh my God, I would be the same. However, what have we done to educate you? We say, go take a training. We say, get online, don't click on a link. And then, but it's like, here's the link to click on to go take the training. It's like, we're kind of like, it doesn't make sense. And so for me, it's very much like, pay attention to what you're doing. And so like the big thing I push constantly with people is pay attention to your identity fabric. And I say that because pay attention to who you are, pay attention to where you use a credit card, pay attention to, do you store stuff on your phone? Do you have sophisticated passwords? And what I talk about with that is that's your cyber hygiene. That's how you actually just be a good citizen. That's not even about how you be a good citizen at work. That's just being a good citizen. You don't want to have an identity theft attack, because if you do, it takes, let's say probably on the average of, one full day, an attacker who, once they steal your identity, I mean, they can open a car loan, they can open credit cards, they can, forward your mail. I mean, the faster they can move through any type of identity fabric for you once they've got your information is catastrophic. Well, what's the return on that? It takes you 3, 4, 5, 6 years to clean that up. I mean, you're dealing with credit unions, you're dealing with, credit companies, and you're dealing with, the Equifax, credit report monitoring people, all the credit reports. I mean, you're going through it and you're going, oh my God. And then you've got to go down to the post office and be like, hey, my mail shouldn't be forwarded. I mean, the sheer like catastrophic footprint of that is going to be crazy. And so for me, that's what I do. I look at DAT and I go, okay, what can I actually solve for? What can I actually fix? And it's really around the phishing domains. How fast can I take them down? It's really around making sure I have the right identity fabric in place to do the blocking and the protecting. And then it's making sure I have the right detections in place, and then making sure we actually can respond to it. I mean,
is identity theft one of the biggest broad, I guess, terms you could use of like some of the biggest issues that we're seeing currently?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I would say it's a little bit of both. I think it's definitely around identity attacks more than anything. So, I mean, people want to get your information. They want to take your MC number. They also want to be a really good person with their new MC number. The next, 6 months later, they're a bad actor. It's like they were a bad actor to begin with. It's just they're going to be like, oh, look, I'm really positive and I'm going to be a good person on your load board. When all they're doing is they're no different than a cyber bad actor. They're sitting dormant. They're waiting to attack later. Yeah, they're sleeping. Exactly. So, you totally
is there a quick little side story, and then I got a question. So this is a real thing, and like from personal experience, we have a guy that's joining my brokerage who ran his own brokerage for like a year and a half and was doing great. And we talked to him, and he's like, I had my identity stolen, and I forget that he had like a sophisticated term of exactly what the attack was and what they did, but they stole his identity and destroyed his reputation. Now he's like, I'm not even going to associate my LLC name anymore. I just need a fresh start. And he's got to start from scratch now because, somebody stole it in basically in a matter of days. He could never rebuild what he had back to where it was.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, like, with the DAT side of things, when it comes to like identity, what are the things that DAT is doing to like protect its customers as far as, you know, I've seen the phishing scams of like every platform, right? You see a really crappy put together email that someone's probably going to fall for, but it's like, hey, we need you to click this button and log in to verify this, and it's like that's not real, but somebody might click on it. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that DAT is doing? I know we talked with some other folks in your organization last year on this topic, but it's obviously been a big issue lately with phishing scams. And do you guys track like the activity that people are doing, and hey, we're going to flag this activity looks weird, or I guess just all around, what are some of the things that inside the DAT environment that you guys are doing to protect the user? Have you fallen victim to double brokering, cargo theft, or identity theft? Quickscope stands out as the only low-level fraud protection tool available today. Unlike any other solution on the market, Quickscope is deployed post-agreement between shippers or brokers and carriers. Shippers can rest assured that their cargo remains secure. Brokers can confidently confirm the identity of the individuals on site for pickup, and carriers can trust that they'll receive timely payment. Start your free trial with Quickscope today by visiting them online at quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE.com. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click join today.
Yeah, a lot of it is we're doing tons of education, tons of awareness and training. So one of the things I always like to tell people is, you know, it's all in how you eat. And that's the phrase. It's education, awareness, and training. So it's how you eat that truck. Again, it's how do you help the user? We have SSO, single sign-on, SAML integrations, which is really great. That protects your account. It's making sure we have more sophisticated passwords. The threat intelligence platform, that's new. That's something that I brought to the table. And then other things, naturally, of course, from a cyber landscape perspective, we can't get too deep into like actually sharing the secret sauce, of course, naturally, but it's really around protecting the customers. The big push I'm going after now is how do we proactively reach out to our customers and say, hey, we're seeing these bad IPs, or hey, we see these countries that are actually creating bigger challenges. And so it's putting that information together now to hopefully run and roll out this campaign here pretty soon of like, here's how we can proactively reach to the brokers, the shippers, the carriers, and say, hey, here's the data we're seeing, and here's the intelligence we're seeing, and get out there and do it. And that's probably the biggest push I can say, even in the 6 months of being here, that I have found from talking just the handful of customers so far, is they're craving that intel. They're craving to understand and wanting to know, hey, what can I do on my end? Is there blocks? Is there things? I can't stop a double brokering thing from happening all the time, but I can make sure we can definitely have the detections to say, hey, we see California as a hotspot, or hey, we see Russia as a hotspot. Like, we're getting tons of things that we see from there. And so it's putting that information into a digestible, threat intelligence platform to then turn around and push that out to our customers and say, here's what you need to be doing also on your end. That's actually what's going to help us stop fraud. The second piece is really, and this is a big thing I push on with people, is you've got to report it. It's a pain. It's a pain in the ass. Like, Nate, you full-heartedly believe. You're not going to go report $10 every single time, but it's the reporting actually matters. That's where you can actually get cybercrime, evangelists that get in and get involved, and they get more ingrained. And I have a very strong partnership with Department of Homeland Security, and we're looking at different ways to do more of like a thing I'm pushing out called zero trust transportation, which is how do we protect our trucking industry better? It's not just about fraud. It's the communication, it's the intelligence, it's the platform. That's what's going to make a difference. It's helping people understand what their attack surface monitoring is. And I know it's probably crazy for people, but like, that's the service I offer. And that's kind of what I tell people. I am your cyber as a service person. I want you to call me and say, come teach me, come help me understand. And like, that's the thing. And some brokers are now starting to catch on, and they're like, hey, are you willing to come to my office location and sit down for a full day and do a full cyber training? Absolutely. That's how we're going to be better as an industry. You have to get out there and eat that truck one bite at a time.
So first thing I wanted to ask too, because I was thinking about that as you were talking about that platform and this information that you have, because Nate and I have tried to actively gather as much to put this out there for the exact point you made, right? Like, you need fundamental education and awareness before you're really going to do anything with a market that large, right? So getting the information out, I think, is absolutely vital. And the side note to that point is we've worked on 2 courses with DAT. And to me, that sounds like a great third course that should be offered and just basically provided to the industry of like fundamentally, what are your steps, like you said, for your, your internet hygiene, I think, is that the way you phrased it? Cyber hygiene, and just understanding where you're at risk and why, right? Because to me, I think like that's got to kind of be the foundation. And then the other piece, like we've shared lists of like, they used to call it like the Glendale list because that was the famous hotspot for double brokers. And we would send Excel sheets around to
like, here's the bad
brokers
MC numbers,
right? But, and that was as effective as it ever could be at that scale. And it's just like when you said like being able to provide more of this, to me, I think this is also the biggest gap in our industry, which was also why we started this to begin with, is like lots of companies just didn't know best practices to do standard things, let alone best practices to prevent people trying to rip them off, right? And that is just this big hole, I think, across the entire industry. And it's on both sides, right? Carriers have just as hard a time vetting brokers that are perpetuating the fraud with them or impersonating them. And it's not just a one-way street where you can look at one specific area. It's across the board. And I think the more this happens, the more the whole industry benefits in efficiency, obviously reduced loss. So you're going to have lower costs across the board. But also, like more importantly, no market functions in the history of humanity without trust. If you don't trust how you're doing business, you will do less of it. There's more friction and it creates issues, right? And anything. And I think the more prevalent this is, the more people are trying to either avoid it or get around it, but they don't have that basic understanding, like you pointed out, of like, hey, these are the fundamental things you should be doing day to day. These are some of the other areas to be aware of. And these are some best practices because nobody is right, like outside of this, like Maersk, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, had that huge attack. I think it was like 9 figures that was like reported offline as to what maybe they paid to get access, but they were my customer. So I remember talking to them. They literally went to Best Buy and bought a bunch of laptops, scrapped every computer in the entire company and started working off paper, right? It's the largest shipper in the world working off reams of paper.
Yeah,
and
it was probably one of
laptops.
the massive, yeah, exactly that. It was like probably one of the most massive supply chain attacks. I mean, I studied it for years. Like I looked at it and I was like, wow, the attack vectors, that the way they were to come in, but like it's how you recover. And I think one of the pieces that I love about what you're totally saying there, Ben, is like if you look at it, and this is the piece I challenge people on. I am a huge technologist. I'm a technologist at heart. I love it. I think my wife probably would kill me every day because I'm on my phone or on my laptop or my iPad all the time. But if the flip side of that is what is everybody doing? We're trying to take new technology and AI and ML and be like, look at how we're going to go solve all these things. Folks, where's the basics? The basics matter. Your cyber hygiene cares. It's cool. And this is what I like to tell people. It's cool. We talk about go use MFA. Multi-factor is amazing. But if you don't know what it does, how is it amazing? If you sit there and go, well, why do I need it?
It's
And
a hassle. Then it's friction and it irritates you, doesn't give you the understanding that it's actually a safety thing.
Yeah, and so it's going to explain to people, hey, when you enable MFA or you want to roll it out, you need to make sure you have a timeout and you need to make sure you have a lockout. Like, hey, if you set it for 30 days, what's the point of even having MFA? I could breach it for 29 more days before you reset it. That's dumb. But it's like those cyber hygiene things, people need to really understand. And I challenge people on that because it's like, look, I would love to use state of the art technology, but most of these companies or most of these, firms that have been around, let's be real, you guys didn't have technology. You had a radio, you had a clipboard, and you made a phone call to have somebody tell you where to pick up your next load. Now you want to put a smartphone in your hand and say, here's some automation and here's some level of sophistication. But by the way, it's going to create tech debt for you, but go do these things. And you're like, I want to pick up my trailer.
Load.
I want to know where it's going. I want to know what my rate per mile is. And I want to be at dinner with my wife or my significant other by the end of the day. We don't do that. We put a bunch of bells and whistles in between and say, here's how we're going to make this better and faster. And it's like, again,
fundamentals.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So this is something that we experienced in my company last week. So we're using there's a tool that we're using to verify identity at the pickup. So quick scope, Ben, you and I have talked about it. We've had them on the show. It's a tool that allows folks to request a geotagged photo within a 2-mile radius of the pickup, and it's going to character recognize the side of the truck, make sure the MC DOT matches, location's all good, right? That way we know, all right, we verified the carrier beforehand, but now we're verifying the correct truck shows up at the pickup before the pickup number is released. Well, we have a driver that gets the link texted out, and he's 70 years old. He's got a flip phone, and his wife set up a spam filter, and now he's like, I don't have the text. And we're like, all right, well, go to your spam filter and authorize this. And he's like, I don't know how to do that. So the whole thing, it's like, this technology is great, but if we don't know how to use it or what it's doing, it does become a huge barrier. And then if you're like, okay, fine, we'll pull back the barrier a little bit. Well, now you're creating that vulnerability again. So I'm actually curious. The average driver age is probably older than the average broker age. I'm just guessing that, and there's, even if it's not, right, you're still going to have a large chunk of the driver population that is, a lot of this technology is very new to them, and that's not how they were used to starting off in their career 30, 40 years ago. So have you guys had has that been like any of the discussion points of like, hey, we got to make this user friendly but effective at the same time? Or what does that look like from DAT's perspective?
Yeah, we definitely, I would say collectively as a company, talk about that. Like, we are very customer obsessed and figure out, how do we think about things differently from a customer perspective, and where can we actually, be better about it and communicate and actually teach them the protections that need to actually happen from hey, if I use this thing. And so it's like, a good example is you talk to me about geotagging, and I sit there and I think there's geo spoofing attacks that happen. There's, deep fake attacks that happen. There's metadata of a picture. Like, there's 3 different ways I'm already thinking of how an attacker can take that information from you. Where you're trying to do the level of protection with sophisticated technology, I'm thinking of there's 9 more ways I can get into it and cause harm to you from a business perspective. So the big thing I push around when I think about with my team is we talk about the customer. How do we think about it? We put, the good old days of like, there's a chair in the room and it's like, okay, if we want to roll this out to a customer, what's the impact to that person? Again, who's just trying to pick up a load and get it from point A to point B. And so we're talking about the technology and the tools that we want to use from a cyber perspective can be really powerful and helpful, but we also don't want to make it burdensome. And I think that's the piece that we really have got to focus on is we've got to think about the customer also in the same breath while we're thinking about, I'm the bad actor. What can I do with this information? And then one step further, if I get this information, now what can I sell for it? There's a whole dark web thing you have to think about and what I can get for, and MC numbers that are being bought, for $10. I mean, things like that are actually happening. You have to pay attention to all that. And so you have to think about that from that customer lens, which is, again, what do I do with all this intelligence I have? And how do I start sharing and populating with the best things to then actually go protect the customer?
It's so sad to me. I wish the world was all rainbows and butterflies and there wasn't bad actors out there. But the reality is, it's probably not. I mean, like, we've seen this wave of fraud in the last couple of years. Like, do you think it's going to get any better, or does the defense proactively just get better, or do the scammers get less incentivized when it gets harder? What do you think the future holds? I mean, it's no one's got a crystal ball, but what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, defense in depth is really going to matter for you. The more defensive layers you have, the better. As much as I think it's hard for people to really understand and digest, every broker, I hope at some point, starts looking at getting a cyber person in their shop. I know a lot of people, they can't afford the technology, but if you're going to actually play in this space and actually go solve fraud, you're going to need to invest in a cyber person, at least one, whether it's an analyst, an engineer, or, like DAT is great. They hired somebody like me, who's got years of experience, but it's like, you have to start thinking about that. The supply chain attack surface, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse before it gets better. That's just proven statistics. I mean, data breaches, I mean, I love it. Everyone's like, oh, I'm not going to be breached. And it's like, really, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Everybody's going to be hit at some point. I mean, it just continues.
Yeah, when and how bad, right?
Yeah, and that's really what it is. And I mean, I hate to say it, like the trucking industry, we are going to see fraud hit a whole new level that is actually going to cause more people to truly get involved and actually probably really come together as a community or as an industry and actually go solve it, which is kind of my whole thing around zero trust transportation. At the end of the day, we all have to come together. We're not going to solve fraud if we all keep trying to do it in pockets. We have to come together as an industry and say, we are going to combat these people.
So I have a question about that too, because I've thought about that a lot recently too, right? Of wanting to have somebody just like you said, some cybersecurity person to be able to overlook everything, look for vulnerabilities, talk about best practices, and just do that. I don't know what the two questions I have for you is, where would somebody, because a lot of our listeners, smaller businesses, right? Handful of people, maybe a few dozen people, right?
Maybe
And
just
everything,
them. Yeah.
maybe one person, and all the way up to the larger companies that we know are, I mean, 5,000-10,000 people, right?
Yeah.
So like for a small business, right? Where can they go? Can they go to like Upwork and just put in cybersecurity person? And then how do you know that person is like, how do you
Is our
find, how do you
contract
vet?
work, you know?
And then how do you pay? Like, what would, even from a high level, where could somebody start to look for this person, and what would they be looking for, and what would they
Yeah.
be paying?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is honestly like you can go out to a small business association and type in cyber, and like it's going to give you a list of contractors. It's going to give you a list of resources. I am a huge proponent, and this is what I genuinely tell people. Again, I love what I do. I think you guys could probably figure it out very fast. Like, wow, she actually like loves her job. And I tell people like I love what I do, and I would do what I do for free because that's how we're actually going to get better as an industry. And so I tell people connect with me on LinkedIn. Like I'm happy to connect people to other contractors or share those free resources. I mean, that's how you're actually going to get better. And so that's the thing I always offer to people is I am cyber as a service. I want you to protect your business, whether it's one person or whether it's 10,000. And so that's the big thing I do is I point people small business association. I mean, they're going to have different cyber resources out there. There's tons of free trainings that I know and I'm aware of. So I'm always willing to share that information. You can go out on LinkedIn and create a LinkedIn account, and people talk about cyber and free trainings all the time. I mean, there's tons of different way. Again, it just goes back to starting with the basics and what do you actually want to solve for. It's a service that I even offer. Like I go out there and I spend tons of times with businesses and actually go on to help them be better. And I mean, it's just what you do. It's just being a good cyber steward, I think, more than anything at the end of the day. And that's how we're going to be better, with our cyber hygiene. And so that's what I'd say. Connect with me. Like I'm happy to connect with people with others, or, if you are thinking about hiring somebody into your cyber organization or even a contractor, like, I mean, I've been in this business for, 27 years now, just in the broader security umbrella. It's like heavily connected. I can connect pretty much somebody probably with somebody at some point who can help them come do it. And then if you want to hire a contractor and you're a small business, I mean, think about what you actually want to solve for. Do like an informational call is what I tell people and say, what is your worry? Is your worry phishing attacks? Okay, cool. You could actually go buy a software and actually do it for $50. Don't go out and spend $500. Or if you want to hire a contractor to train your people or hire a person to come train your people, I mean, then go do it. You're probably gonna spend $250 maybe, but that $250 could be pretty valuable to
Well
stop
worth it.
one attack.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, and that's the thing. And that's the thing I'm doing even with DAT and with our sales group is I spend a ton of time talking with them about cyber as a service, and our sales guys they're excited. They're actually bringing me out into the field now, and they're having me meet with different customers and brokers. And I tell them, I was like, look, I'm happy to come do training with you all. I have an entire team. Like we're willing to come teach you how to be better. And like you should be pushing DAT for us wanting to do that. And that's how we're going to change our attack landscape. And that's how we're going to have solid cyber hygiene. And then when you want to get into levels of sophistication, I mean, that's where I can go really deep with tons of people and say, here's how we could solve kind of that zero trust, which is really what you want. You want to, it sounds weird to say it, but like you don't want to trust anybody hitting your network. You want them to continually authenticate that it, like it's Nate every time coming to DAT. I know it's Nate. Everything he does inside my DAT network, it's Nate the entire time. I want him to continually authenticate. So I know wherever Nate goes, it's actually Nate. It's not Nate got in and actually, I don't care what Nate's doing 7 days down the road. Nate's taking all my, crown jewels with him out the door because I never vetted him. So doing zero trust is really where it's about.
So you made a comment, or Ben, you had another question. Go ahead, and then I'll ask mine.
The one, it was just kind of a follow up to that, right? Like how much in the path from where we are to where you ultimately feel like the industry needs to go, right? Which is clearly, we'll call it, I don't know, handful year timeline. I don't know, 10 years, 5 years, right? Like just a longer time scope, right? How much do you think, because I know you mentioned earlier that like we need to come together as an industry as a whole. And the thing that Nate was talking about earlier is we really do need the FMCSA to be doing things like DAT is to protect the database. Because to me, like I came from banking, like you got to know your customer regulations. We verify this with literal documentation. You can't open a bank account or just
Same.
conversation to stealing identities aside for a moment, right? Like we regulate that. You can't go to a bank. You can't take money. That is regulated for this very purpose, right? But yet we don't really have this secure database, or it's much more secure than it was last year, the FMCSA. And it is absolutely making progress towards there. Nate's been updating us on like what they were doing last year and what they'll be talking about this year. So clearly more resources. But how much do you think needs to be done on the federal side to verify and protect the motor carrier numbers, which are the identities of the businesses, for us to get to this place we want to go?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to your crystal ball statement. I mean, that's probably a space I would love to see the FMCSA get involved with, is actually stand up a cyber arm. Like, they're missing that, I think, truly, from how the federal wants to change the industry. I mean, it's your critical infrastructure at the end of the day. It's your trucking business, like from point A to point B, North America. I mean, why would you not have a cyber arm? The level of sophisticated like cyber attacks that are happening, that's what needs to happen. I mean, I hope with, what was it? I think I read yesterday, Beauty Edge appointed somebody finally now to take over the FMCSA. And it's like, that's great. But like, that would be the question I'd asking. What are you going to do to battle cyber threats? Like, that's where it's going to come down to. It's cool. We want to go clean the database and we want to go build new things. Again, you're going back to do this stuff. But where's the cyber hygiene that we're all missing and craving and pushing for? How do we vet that you don't have a PO box or a fake Google number? I mean, what are you doing to fix that? That's what's actually missing, at least from my perspective, from an industry perspective. I mean, that's what actually the FMCSA needs. They need to go hire their cyber chief security officer and be like, I'm going to work hand in hand and stand up the zero trust transportation group. That's how you're going to actually change the industry and actually solve the fraud problem.
Yeah, Ben, I'm glad you asked your question first. It kind of segued into mine. So, and it's a great point. The FMCSA they're like the door that opens up that lets people into this environment, right? They're the licensing.
It's a two-way door. It's not a one-way door, right? There's like,
out, right? And like some of the things that we had discussed with some of the folks on Capitol Hill, just as like ideas, was like, okay, well, if somebody is, if there's, if you have, I guess, beyond a reasonable doubt, or whatever the term would be, that somebody is a bad actor on the inside.
Yep.
Why is there not a way for like the FMCSA to be like, pause, your authority is being put on hold while we internally investigate? And I think the answer was like, they don't have the resources in place to do anything about it. So the only option would be kick them out. And then it's like, well, are you then potentially discriminating against a non-bad actor? And then it just looks bad. But yeah, the barrier to entry to get into our industry is so low. $300 an application online, and you wait a couple weeks, and boom, you're after it. And you can apply for 400 MC numbers, and they're at PO boxes or at a warehouse or whatever. So, but anyway, to segue from that into my question was, that you made a comment earlier about, we can't all be doing this independently. We have to work together as a whole to fight this. You're going to get that synergy type of outcome then. So FMCSA is obviously one, but are you guys working with, like, and we never really mentioned their name on the show, but like Truck Stop, right? Or like Highway. We love Highway. We've had them on the show. They're not obviously a load board competitor of DAT. You guys, a lot of people use both, right? One for carrier identity and capacity on the other platform. But are you guys doing anything in conjunction with the Truck Stops of the world or the Highways of the world? So these carrier vetting companies, other load boards, or the regulatory side of it with the FMCSA? Is there any collaboration or discussion, or because it's probably kind of weird when you're like, well, we kind of fight for customers if you're a direct competitor, but we kind of want to solve this all together because people might want to use both of our products. So how do you handle that part of it?
Yeah, I'm not doing anything specifically with them, but I think that's also just full transparency. I think I'm still learning DAT in our business model. So I think it's more of like, I would love to see us come together. I don't think we should look at it as hey, we're all competing in the same competitive landscape. I think it needs to be kind of, again, what I keep pushing, that zero trust transportation is coming together as an industry to drive that synergy to how we can all tackle fraud. And I think we do it from a cyber perspective with private public partnerships. You kind of all just agree to sign this, non-existent NDA of like, look, we're just going to share best practices and share how we can tackle the fraud. I think that's what's going to have to be done. I know TIA does a ton of work around, how they're trying to combat fraud, but
totally, yeah,
we're all still doing fraud again in like these individual pockets. And so I would probably say more of the challenges is, when are we all going to come together? Like, I am a huge evangelist for bringing us together as a community, as an industry.
Going to TIA in the fall?
I am going to TIA in the fall. I went to TIA in February for my first time down at April, and really got to meet people and kind of really started understanding the fraud landscape and kind of how we all talk about it. And I think that's the big push now is, well, what are we all seeing? Who's got the threat intelligence to actually change it? I mean, are other companies looking at threat intelligence platforms? I mean, most companies I talk to, they don't have a cyber leader. So it's kind of like, how are they tackling fraud? And we get out there as a group and we talk about, way we can solve for it with a solution, which is cool. But again, what is your cyber hygiene? How do I go to Nate's point? How do I teach the small broker who's got like maybe 10 people? Or how do I teach, the small business who's got him or her that are actually driving? It's like, we've got to figure out a way to still teach them the basics and the fundamentals with, what is multi-factor authentication, or what is, hi, don't click on this link, or what's a phishing domain, like those things, which still actually are targeting people. That's the stuff that's taking people down. It's not, oh dear God, so-and-so trucking has now been hit with a cyber attack. But you watch, you will see that at some point. I guarantee it. You will see a brokerage company be hit by a cyber attack.
You're going to enjoy the TIA. Yeah, you're going to enjoy the TIA conference in September. It's obviously your first policy forum, but it's a great way, and that's a prime example of how TIA does a good job of saying, hey, we're going to bring a bunch of our competitors into one building, meaning like a bunch of freight brokers, but you'll have vendors like your DATs, your highways, and insurance provider. All those folks are all there too. But we'll bring a bunch of competing freight brokers who come together to try and present solutions and voice like the challenges that we're having as constituents to our lawmakers, right? And we share it amongst each other. There's a lot of networking between different brokerages on best practices. And nobody goes home from that event and is like, they're going to steal my business. And my customers is like, no, I learned 10 times more from being around 100 different people that do the same job as me every single day than I would have if I just did it on my own. So I think you're going to really enjoy that. And I'll be there. I'll get to say hello in person. But yeah, that is a great event. And this is like a hot topic. And
I think that's going to be huge. And that I'm actually excited for. And that's probably the one thing I started to see, even with some of the industry conferences that are going on. I love that there's always a conversation around fraud. And so now I naturally, as a change agent, I'm pushing that with like, well, where's the cyber track? Where's the track about cybersecurity and what you should be doing from a best practices perspective? Your fraud output is a lack of your cyber posture. Like that's some of the challenges you have. What are you doing from a cyber perspective? And so it's interesting because that's the conversation that continues to happen, but that's a different door. I have all these fraud problems. Great. Well, what are you doing to have cyber detections or protections in place? And it's like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, like if you want to get hit, it's easy to hit you, but what are you actually doing to make sure you have a good cyber posture to begin with? For example, I remember talking to a customer and they got on and there was this whole conversation around, due diligence and, making sure that the accounts are being protected. And the first question I asked the person after they got done, kind of going for, good 5 minutes. And I'm very customer focused. I want to hear their pain points. And so they went through the whole spiel and they got to the end and I said, okay, so what are you doing with your account? And the question was like, well, what do you mean? And I go, well, how many times do you share your account password? Well, I have to share it 14 different times. Okay, well, you're your own worst enemy. Rule number 1, you never share a password. And it's like, but that's how I have to do my business. No, it's you're being cheap. Pay for 14 accounts.
Yeah.
Stick with the 14 accounts.
And it reminded me too, and you were saying this earlier, just in this episode, about like trying to fix things after the fact without any of the responsibility before. Like I'm like in my head, I just have this analogy of teaching my daughter to ride a bike, but not teaching her how to like avoid cars or when to cross the street or anything that she needs to be responsible. Like she's got a helmet and elbow pads.
Yeah, she's
have at it.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, like there's some responsibility in like what she should learn how to do to avoid the problems in the first place. The helmet is there and the inevitable that an accident happens. It's like, if you're just creating scenarios where you're vulnerable all day long because you're handing out passwords, it's like literally emailing your driver's license to a bunch of new employees that you didn't run background checks and that work in another country. And I'm like, that can be okay, but
exactly. I'm going to sit there and go, okay, well, here's all the things you've done wrong first. Go fix those things first, which is on your end. Then I can come in and help you. And I think that's the push that I keep pushing for is where's the cyber tracks? Go to your point, teach the people how to secure themselves first and foremost. Then you can go in and say, okay, now here's where we can get new levels of sophistication. I mean, that's the piece that I'm hoping changed. And that's the piece that, I think it's National Motor Freight.
NMFTA, I think, National Motor Freight Transportation Association.
Exactly. They reached out to me just recently and they were like, hey, we're going to do a cybersecurity conference in October. Cool. It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Would you come talk? Absolutely. Let's talk about third-party risk. Let's talk about how we can do cyber basics and things like that. That's what we should be doing. Where's the cyber conference? So again, that's kind of the pushback to, some of these folks. We want to come together and solve fraud. Then where's the cyber conference for the industry?
let me ask you this.
Every freight person would go to it.
For sure. And like, because they're seeing it and they're experiencing it's costing them money. There's a pain there, right? And if you got it and you're going to do it and people recognize it, they'll go. The two questions I have is like, what would you suggest, as like an overall way to drive more awareness? Because we know it's the government and the government does things when they feel pain, right? Like have all the trucking companies and all the brokers call their local congressmen to advocate to the FMCSA to do this. Like, what do you think would need to happen? And the follow-up is like, enforcement. Like they don't enforce any of the fines or regulations. Do you think either of those things could help in the scenario?
Yeah, I think the big thing again, it's that cyber arm is missing from a federal level if you're going to really go solve critical infrastructure for the trucking industry. I mean, there's billions of dollars, trillions of dollars in theory that run through our entire like supply chain transportation until something actually gets done there. And I think the painful part is, and I think it's just based on statistics, until there's actually an attack that hits that actual trucking industry or takes somebody down, I don't know that someone's going to want to go fix it truly. I mean, we do a lot of great talking and we're talking to our congressperson, and we're saying, hey, we want to do it. But it kind of comes back to what are we doing to come together as an industry? Who's going to actually say there needs to be some money put in place? I mean, I'm a person like I have my doctorate, go write for grant money. People will give you money, then go do it. I mean, I'm at the point to where it's like, I'm starting to look at how can I change industry? I am an industry change agent for a reason. DAT was when they hired me, I was very clear even through my interview process. I am a change agent. If you do not want to make change, do not waste my time. Like you don't want to hire me then. And it's like, I've been here, 6 months. I've tripled my team. I brought in really sophisticated levels of tools. We're doing the things. It's still not fast enough even for me, but I also know it's really important to land the message right, to tell the story correctly to our customers, to help educate them. And so I am being very intentional now to go out and start getting in the field and spending time with our customers. But the piece that's still missing for me is where can I bring that all together? And I think that's where I started going, I want a zero trust transportation group. And I hope at some level, I would say that's almost the challenge. I would love a federal person to reach out to me and say, okay, how do we go do zero trust transportation? And then let's get the community to come together, the industry leaders to come together and say, here's the things we're seeing from a cyber attack landscape. Again, remember your fraud output is a lack of your cyber posture. I mean, that's the thing you've got to go fix. You've got to fix your cyber.
So to put a bow on the conversation, what are some actionable takeaway, like bite-sized tips that you would give to the freight broker that's out there that's listening, or maybe it's a small trucking company that's thinking about expanding into brokerage or whatnot? So what are some actionable things? We talked about not sharing your password. What are some other easy like takeaways here?
Yeah, the big thing is definitely enable multi-factor authentication, but there's an app. Like download the app to actually do it. There's a Google Authenticator app, there's a Microsoft one. I mean, everybody's got some type of authentication app. Do it that way. That's going to generate a code to you. Well, getting that code is actually going to be more secure for you. Making sure that you actually educate your users on really don't click on a link. I can guarantee, and I always tell people this, I'd stake my entire career on it. I'm never going to ask you for your password in email. If you get an email that is asking for that or wanting you to put in your credentials, that is your phishing scam. They are looking to phish your credentials. You have to, and I know it's hard, which is, again, it's 2024, people are still clicking on links. You've got to slow down for that 30 seconds and go, wait, why are they asking me for my password? Or, did I actually ask for my password to be reset? If you didn't, then that's the phish. That's the attack that's actually trying to come at you. The other thing is pay attention. I mean, there's bad actors out there. They're going to send you a text. They're going to try to be like, hey, your banking information has been changed, or hey, this route's been changed. I can give you a cheaper load. Is it really ever a cheaper load? Like that should be a red flag. Those are the big things to really kind of pay attention to, is what are those red flags that we should actually look at? The next piece, again, I cannot say it enough. Report it, report it, report it. I know it's painful. I know it's hard. I know the paperwork process. I get the insurance side of it. But if you don't report it, we're never going to fix it. There's 8 different type of fraudsters out there. There's people who get paid to be fraudsters for a reason. That's how they make their living. If you don't report it, we can't stop those fraudsters.
See something, say something, right?
See something, say something. And then, I mean, I'd offer myself up anytime anybody needs help, comments, questions, concerns, reach out to me. Like I am here to help us.
Awesome. Ben, you have anything else you want to ask before we
No, it was great. I mean, we could literally have this conversation the rest of the morning. There's tons of other things I want to ask, but yeah, I mean, I think we got a really good synopsis.
We'll do a part 2 later this year.
Yeah, let's do a part 2 for sure. It'd be fun to have a series.
Awesome. Well, cool. Erika, it's great to have you on here. I will make sure that in our show notes, I sent you a LinkedIn request, so I think I got the right Erika Voss, PhD in the greater Seattle area. So we'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes in the description on YouTube so people can connect with you and they know how to reach out and all that good stuff. But anything you want to close out with, or anything you want to final thoughts or words here?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is again, like, reach out, share the information, reach out, see something, say something, you got to report it. I mean, we're going to get better as an industry if we just communicate, start talking.
Awesome. Ben, final thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to tie that into what we talk about all the time, right? If you've got an issue, whatever that is, before you look at everyone else to help you solve it, first look at the things you can do and also do the second, right? Like, because as Erika pointed out, like, it all starts with our behavior, what we're doing, whether it's in sales, how many times you pick up the phone, or whether it's creating opportunities for fraud or criminals to be able to attack you, right? Learn the basics, spend some time, spend an hour or two instead of scrolling through TikTok, watch a couple of these things, reach out to, her on LinkedIn and look for some reputable trainings that you can take your company through, because pretty low cost, really high reward. To me, like, this is a huge issue that everyone needs to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
And whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.